Millions of fans watched Washington win 3 Super Bowls in the 1980s, behind an offensive line so punishing it earned its own nickname, the Hogs, a name the players wore with pride, even though the reporter who coined it meant it as an insult. The team that built that identity produced 3 championships under a coach who never once raised his voice on the sideline. But even the Hogs paid a bill nobody put on the scoreboard: a functionally illiterate Pro Bowler hooked on cocaine, a quarterback's leg broken live on national television, a Hall of Fame coach who buried 2 sons at the exact same age, 5 years apart. This is where Washington's 1980s dynasty really ended up. One is the defensive end whose 9 seasons of terrorizing quarterbacks hid a secret so complete that it took a national tragedy to finally pull it out of him in public. Dexter Manley recorded 97.5 sacks across 9 seasons in Washington, still the franchise record, earning the nickname Secretary of Defense and a first-team All-Pro selection in 1986 with 18.5 sacks in a single season, a mark that still commands respect decades later. Born in Houston in 1959, Manley entered Oklahoma State, reading at a second-grade level, and graduated 4 years later, having fooled an entire university athletic system without anyone forcing him to learn, surrounded for 9 professional seasons by coaches, trainers, and front office staff who knew or suspected the truth and never once intervened. He started using cocaine casually in his second NFL season, and the habit progressed for years behind what teammates later described as a larger-than-life public persona built specifically to hide what was happening underneath it. Before Super Bowl 22, Manley failed a drug test that the organization reportedly didn't report to the league until after the game had already been played, so he could still take the field. In 1985, Manley watched teammate Joe Theismann's leg shatter live on Monday Night Football, and the shock of that moment pushed him toward finally confronting his own secret. In May of 1989, he testified before a U.S. Senate Committee on Illiteracy, tearfully admitting he had not been able to read at an adult level until age 28, testimony so raw that one senator told him plainly that the system, not him, had failed. Months later that same year, a third failed drug test triggered a lifetime ban from the NFL. He played 2 more seasons in the Canadian Football League, still fighting the addiction, and the years that followed brought a divorce, homelessness, multiple arrests, and, at one especially low point, the sale of one of his own Super Bowl rings just to pay for cocaine. Manley has been clean for nearly 2 decades now, reading at a high school level since the early 1990s, and he and his wife Lydia run a foundation dedicated to literacy access for children in the Washington, D.C. area. He is alive today, in his late 60s, having survived a serious bout of COVID-19 in 2020 that put him in the hospital for weeks. The Secretary of Defense spent nearly a decade terrorizing opposing quarterbacks in front of sold-out stadiums. Dexter Manley later called learning to read the proudest accomplishment of his entire life, greater than any sack record or championship ring the sport ever gave him. 2 is the quarterback whose career ended on live television in front of the entire country, in a single play still ranked among the most shocking moments the sport has ever broadcast. Joe Theismann led Washington to victory in Super Bowl 17 and was named NFL MVP the following season, a former Notre Dame standout who finished second in Heisman voting in 1970 and began his pro career in the Canadian Football League before becoming one of the league's most durable and outspoken quarterbacks. Born in New Brunswick, New Jersey in 1946, Theismann started all 16 games in 8 different seasons for Washington, building a reputation as tough enough to play through nearly anything across a 12-season career spent entirely with the same franchise. On November 18, 1985, during a Monday Night Football game against the New York Giants at RFK Stadium, Theismann took the snap on a flea flicker, handed off to John Riggins, took the ball back, and was swarmed by the Giants' blitzing defense, including linebacker Lawrence Taylor, whose knee caught Theismann's right leg between the ankle and knee and snapped his tibia and fibula so violently that the broadcast booth warned viewers to look away before the replay aired. Theismann said he felt almost no pain at first. The shock had numbed everything below the knee, and he later joked with Joe Gibbs on the stretcher that he'd be back that same night, not yet knowing he never would be again. The injury remains so infamous that ESPN ranked it among the most shocking moments in the network's own history, and it fundamentally changed how the sport values its offensive tackles, making the blindside protector one of the highest-paid positions in football almost overnight. Theismann transitioned quickly into broadcasting, spending decades afterward as an NFL analyst on Monday Night Football and other networks. He is alive today, in his late 70s, still a regular presence on football broadcasts and in Washington alumni circles, having said publicly that the standing ovation he received while being wheeled off that field convinced him whatever Joe Theismann had been before that night had died, and something new had been born in its place. 3 is the fullback whose punishing, workhorse running style made him the most beloved player in franchise history, right up until his life after football turned out to be nothing like the man fans thought they knew. John Riggins, nicknamed the Diesel, became Washington's all-time leading rusher with 11,352 yards, and his Super Bowl 17 performance, 166 rushing yards, including a signature 43-yard touchdown run on 4th and 1, remains one of the defining moments in franchise history. Born in Seneca, Kansas in 1949 and raised on a farm outside the small town of Centralia, Riggins joined Washington in 1976 after 5 seasons with the New York Jets, and by his own admission, spent most of his career playing out of a fear of disappointing people rather than any deep passion for the sport itself. He retired in 1985, and his life afterward took a direction almost nobody expected from a bruising Hall of Fame fullback. He became a yogi, a vegan, and by his own description, a house husband, building a lighthearted, unpredictable public persona that included hosting his own outdoor cooking and hunting show and launching a line of sausages and craft beer under his own name. In July of 2026, more than 4 decades after his Super Bowl heroics, the Washington Commanders finally retired his number 44 jersey, a permanent honor the organization had somehow never gotten around to giving its own franchise rushing leader. He is alive today, in his late 70s, still doing yoga several mornings a week, one of the most enduring and unpredictable personalities the Hogs era ever produced. Riggins carried a football team through some of the toughest yardage in Super Bowl history, using nothing but sheer stubbornness. John Riggins spent the 4 decades afterward proving that the same man who won that game, on 4th and 1, could also spend his Tuesday mornings folding himself into a downward dog. If Riggins is the name that surprised you most, tell me in the comments, because the next 2 men on this list built something with their own hands once the cameras finally stopped rolling. 4 is the guard whose blue-collar toughness became the very definition of what it meant to wear the Hog nickname, and whose second act in coaching lasted nearly twice as long as his own playing career. Russ Grimm was a 3rd-round pick out of Pittsburgh in 1981, moved from center to left guard as a rookie, and became, alongside tackle Joe Jacoby, one half of what many considered the most punishing side of any offensive line in football at the time. Born in Scottsdale, Pennsylvania in 1959, Grimm helped anchor Washington's ground attack through 3 Super Bowl victories, earning 4 straight Pro Bowl selections and All-Pro honors in each of those seasons. One of his own teammates once said that nobody embodied the Hog persona more completely than Grimm, calling him simply a blue-collar stiff and proud of it. After retiring following the 1991 season, Grimm spent the next 26 years as an NFL assistant coach across 4 different franchises, developing offensive linemen long after his own playing days had ended. He was finally elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 2010 after 5 years as a finalist. He is alive today, in his late 60s, retired from coaching since 2017, having watched 2 of his own sons follow him into football and into coaching themselves. Grimm helped build an offensive line so dominant it forced the rest of the league to rethink how trenches were built. Russ Grimm spent almost 3 decades after his playing days handing that same toughness down to the next generation of linemen who never got to see him play. 5 is the tackle who went undrafted out of Louisville and became the lead blocker on the single most famous touchdown run in franchise history, and who has spent decades since watching the Hall of Fame call go to nearly everyone around him except himself. Joe Gibbs signed with Washington as an undrafted free agent in 1981 and became a 4-time Pro Bowler and 3-time Super Bowl champion, most famously clearing the path for John Riggins' championship-sealing touchdown run in Super Bowl XVII. Born in Louisville, Kentucky in 1959, Jacoby was named to the NFL's 1980s All-Decade Team in 1990 and remains to this day the only member of that All-Decade team never elected to the Pro Football Hall of Fame, a fact that has become one of the sport's most cited Hall of Fame snubs, with rivals like Lawrence Taylor himself publicly vouching for his enshrinement over the years. Jacoby retired in 1993 after Washington's 3rd Super Bowl title and became the owner of an automobile dealership in Warrenton, Virginia, building a successful second career entirely outside of football. He advanced to finalist status for the Hall of Fame Seniors category as recently as 2025, keeping alive the hope among Washington fans that his bust might still eventually join his old teammate Russ Grimm's in Canton. He is alive today in his late 60s, running his business in rural Virginia, still just one committee vote away from an honor that has eluded him for over 30 years. Jacoby cleared the path for the most famous touchdown run in Washington football history with his own body. Joe Jacoby has spent every year since watching nearly every teammate around him get inducted first, still waiting for his own turn to arrive. The 5 men above all carried the weight of their own choices, their own bodies, their own second acts. If you've made it this far, hit subscribe, because the last name on this list carried something no championship ever prepared him for. 6 is the head coach whose soft-spoken, deeply religious leadership built 3 championships with 3 different starting quarterbacks, an achievement no coach in Super Bowl history has ever matched, and whose own family quietly paid a price the scoreboard never once reflected. Joe Gibbs coached Washington for 12 seasons in his first stint, retiring in 1992 with 3 Super Bowl titles, before returning for a second run from 2004 to 2007. Born in Mocksville, North Carolina in 1940, Gibbs built his championship rosters around the very Hogs described throughout this list, and was inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame in 1996. After football, he built an entirely separate legacy in NASCAR, founding Joe Gibbs Racing in 1992 and winning 5 Cup Series championships as a team owner, becoming the only person ever inducted into both the Pro Football Hall of Fame and the NASCAR Hall of Fame. That second success arrived bundled with a grief no championship could soften. In January of 2019, Gibbs's eldest son, J.D. Gibbs, died at age 49 following a long battle with a degenerative neurological disorder that had ended his own racing career years earlier. Less than 4 years later, in November of 2022, Gibbs's other son, Coy Gibbs, died suddenly in his sleep at a racetrack in Phoenix, hours after his own son had just won a championship, at the exact same age his brother had been when he died. Joe Gibbs is alive today, in his mid-80s, still involved with Joe Gibbs Racing, having buried 2 sons 5 years apart at the identical age of 49, a private grief he has carried quietly behind 2 Hall of Fame careers built almost entirely on discipline and faith. Gibbs built a coaching legacy that no Super Bowl winning coach since has managed to equal. Joe Gibbs is still here today, having outlived both of his own sons, carrying a loss that neither trophy case in either sport he conquered was ever built to hold. The Hogs earned their name from a sports writer who meant it as an insult, and the men who wore it anyway turned out to be tougher off the field than they ever needed to be on it. A defensive end learned to read at 30 after nearly losing everything. A quarterback rebuilt an entire second career out of the same leg the country watched break. A running back traded his cleats for a yoga mat. 2 linemen are still waiting, 30 years later, for the same phone call to finally arrive. And the coach who built all of it around them is still here, carrying 2 funerals no championship banner was ever designed to mention. That is the actual final score of Washington's 1980s dynasty, tallied not in points, but in exactly what each man was left holding once the stadium finally emptied out.